Hello, I'm Bob the Booker and welcome to my channel. And as part of the International Booker Prize 2024 long list and shortlist, I'm reading all of the books from it and doing solo reviews, probably now just for the shortlist moving forward. But excited to talk a little bit more about this. And today's one, Crooked Plow, the lighting is a bit off on that. Crooked Plow by Itamar Viera Jr. And translated by Johnny Lorenz. And this is sort of exciting for several reasons, I think. It is not only a Brazilian novel, and we've sort of seen bits of sort of Brazilian literature really kind of breaking through into the sort of Anglophone sphere recently, which has been fantastic. A lot more getting translated, but also it kind of is interesting for several other reasons. It's quite different to a lot of other Brazilian literature we've had in terms of it focuses a little bit more on the sort of Black and kind of Afro-Brazilian communities, and it also focuses on areas of the country that are kind of slightly further afield from, kind of Rio and sort of other big cities. So it's really interesting in several ways. And I found this book really just, there's a lot to really like about it. In the video, I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of the area pre-spoilers and sort of a bit post-spoilers. So I will let you know beforehand. There'll be enough of a bit, hopefully, for you to be able to talk for you to be able to hear about this book without having read it. And in the spoiler section, I'll go into a little bit more detail. All of the spoilery bits in the non-spoiler section will be, not even that it won't be spoilers, all the bit in the non-spoiler section will be either things that you can glean from the back of the book or from the first few pages. So I won't go into too much detail beyond that. So let's get started. So in this book, the core story really focuses on two young girls, and particularly sort of, there is a large focus in this book on generations, but we start right with these two young girls, and particularly sort of an act of violence right from the beginning. And again, this doesn't spoil anything, I think, to mention right from the beginning, because it is sort of part of the synopsis of the book. But essentially the two girls, one of the first things we see is a knife. And this is a sort of a very sort of sharp blade that is there with the young girls, and they sort of unravel it and sort of try to work out what to do. There's some kind of story or belief that you can test the strength of this knife on your tongue. And this seems to sort of be like there's almost a ritual aspect to this. But what quickly comes up as part of that is an act of violence where essentially that goes slightly wrong. And right from the jump, we basically then have these two slightly traumatized young girls who are trying to work out what on earth to do next. One of whom now cannot sort of talk properly because of her tongue and this knife, and the other who stays silent as a sort of act of solidarity, basically. And this then leads into these two already relatively disempowered young girls in society. They're in this far off part of Brazil that isn't really connected to a lot of other things in quite the same way. It hasn't got this sort of big city right next door and the sort of opportunities that come with that. It's got this, these two young girls basically sort of immediately feel from the jump that there's almost been a curse on them. And this feels like a recurrent theme in the book. There's this sort of magic quality to it, this sort of spiritual magic, almost magical realism, I think, in the way it talks about things, where sometimes this book is very real and very brutal and factual and very kind of stripped down and bare, and at times has this sort of lyrical, spiritual feel to it. Both of which I think blend together beautifully in this book, because I think there's something about the way of watching this young girl sort of deal with the after effects of this that feels both like she is a young girl sort of dealt some very bad cards, but also like she is she's sort of treated almost sometimes as this sort of mythical figure in the wider community. And so I think there's something really fascinating going on with this book. And basically we then follow through the generations of these young women. We see sort of a wider fleshed out story about their mother and their grandmother, and this sort of line of women all struggling to make ends meet and make things work in the sort of harshest environments. And I think this is what I found really captivating about the book, is that sort of blend of this sort of brutality and this sort of magic creates this really quite compelling narrative, I think, where we're basically watching sort of people just struggle day to day to get through, but there's some kind of poignancy added to it from an outsider perspective. There's sort of something where you almost feel like they're going to triumph over a curse, or they're going to find a way of navigating things. And it's sort of worth noting, kind of linked to that, this book sort of intentionally references or is kind of linked to sort of the end of slavery, in the sense of sort of reflecting several generations after the end of slavery, what has changed. And actually the lives these young women lead often don't feel that different, or there's some kind of carryover and kind of hangover from those times. So I think this book is really interesting in the way that it really provokes discussion around some of those conversations. It really interrogates some of those, but through the lens of these really sort of courageous and intriguing women. And I think there's something so sort of magical about the way this book does it. It's going to be difficult to talk about a bit more of this without going into some spoilers, but what I do want to sort of say is I think this is very much worth your time as a book. I sort of occasionally, a little bit in the middle of this book, sort of wasn't quite sure what I was reading, but I think it really delivers a sort of knockout blow in terms of the conversations it opens, and in the ways that it really gives space for the inner lives of these two young women to really blossom, and of several other women in the book as well. So if you do need to jump off because of spoilers, this is your spoiler curtain being dropped here. Thank you for stopping by. Thank you for flying with Bob Airlines. But more broadly, I sort of wanted to talk a bit about sort of towards the end of this book, especially. So please do feel free to log off if you need to. But what I think is really fascinating about the way this book builds and builds is we start to see these two young women reaching kind of various other parts of their lives, and how this really hangs over them. There is a real sense that the decisions and actions from when they were children linger with them. They are kind of almost curses that these two young girls really have to navigate, and particularly the other women in their family have to navigate. And so there's almost the sense that it's been passed down sort of through birth. They have been cursed as soon as they were born, which again, I think links in really interestingly to this wider narrative around the hangover from slavery and from various other things. These women live in this sort of really difficult part of Brazil in terms of the sort of the nature aspect of it. It's sort of a slightly more arid area. And so their lives that they sort of exist within are really complicated. I read another book recently, Out of the Earth, which also dealt with, I think, this same region. And it was fascinating to see the kind of the grit of them having to survive in a time like this. Also a set of three women, actually, generation by generation. Very interesting book. But what I think this book does really intelligently off the back of that is to turn that into, what do you do when your only chance at survival is to essentially be the most brutal, be the most powerful, be the most wily. And the end of this book particularly focuses on this with a look at a trap that is set for, it sort of talks about a leopard going into a trap. I think it was a leopard or a jaguar. And there's something so interesting about the way it kind of does this sort of beast, this powerful creature, so jaguar, being sort of sucked into this thing that's so brutal. And this idea, the final line of this book is all about survival and about being the strongest. And the idea of survival of the fittest feels like a cruel joke throughout the book, that these are some of the strongest characters we might ever meet, and they're only just about surviving, and they have to be that tough to survive. But equally, we see the human cost there, that we see that they can't live lives that they need to or want to. We see that they are often, so they're almost always wearing their armor, and as a result, they never really get to rest, and their life is just one of struggle. All of this, I realise, makes it sound like an incredibly bleak book, and obviously parts of it are quite bleak. But I also think it's just so well done that there's a sort of humour that creeps in sometimes, even if it's sort of gallows humour. There's a darkness here, but also these moments of joy or of kind of triumph, and I think that's what makes this book really work. I think kind of as this book kind of builds towards this end, you kind of get this sense that things are kind of full circle, because we see the return of the knife, and as a result we sort of have a sense that this curse may continue to some degree, or at least this knife is not really going anywhere. And I think that there's something slightly slightly makes you shudder about the way this book ends, that I think is really well observed and really well thought out. Anyway, I've been talking about this book. I hope you have enjoyed it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Take care and speak to you all soon. Bye-bye.